Welcome to the 8th video of the Blender 2.8 Beginners Tutorial series. This video is all about getting into working with materials. We will have a look at the brand new LookDev mode, which allows us to quickly preview our materials in the 3D viewport. Then we will have a look at the basic material settings and the principled shader. Then we will have a look at the shader editor. And after that we will use our new gained knowledge to create the material for the apple and the knife to make these two objects look beautiful. As always, you can find the timestamps in the video description below. And if you want to follow along, you can sign up to our resource section free of charge to get access to all the blend files, textures and videos of this free course. And you can also download our handy Blender 2.8 shortcut PDF, the link you find down below in the video description. Hi everyone, Zach here for cgboost.com and let's get started. Alright, now let's only focus on the UV unwrapped models like the apple and the knife over here. So for now, let's hide the fabric and also the ball. And again, let's recenter this apple here, put it up a bit. And in order to start the shading process, first of all, let's click on this little button here, which enables the LookDev mode. The LookDev mode basically adds a lighting setup to the scene, and it will also show us all the properties of the materials when we add materials to our objects. Right now, all these objects don't have materials, that's why they are just gray. So, and if I click on this little arrow up here, and on this ball, I can choose between different lighting setups for my scene. So for example, I can choose this one and you can see how this changes the lighting in the scene here. And that's really important when you create a material to check this in different lighting conditions to see if the material works good in different environments basically. So when you create an object for an animation and while the animation is running, the lighting changes or you have different scenes with the same objects, you need to make sure that this object always looks good because the lighting has a big effect on how the object looks, and that's why it is important to check different lighting setups. So let's start with this one here because this is relatively neutral. And in order to add a material to an object, all you need to do is to click on this little button here to the material tab. Don't confuse this with the world tab, which looks quite similar. And then click on new to add a new material. First of all, in order to know what material belongs to what object, let's click in here. And let's call it apple. Then in Blender we are working with so-called shader. Each shader has different properties, and in order to change the shader you click behind surface on this principled BSDF. If I click on that, you can see we have a shader list over here. Here we have, for example, a diffuse shader for a simple color, a glossy shader for a reflective material, an emission shader for glowing objects. We also have a mix shader to mix two different shaders together, and so on and so forth. But luckily we don't need that many shaders anymore because we have this principled shader, which is also enabled by default, because this is basically one kind of Übershader which includes all the other stuff. So basically with this one shader we can create glossy and glass and diffuse materials all in one shader. So basically you don't need to switch anything because down here we have all the settings for the principled shader because the principled shader is enabled over here. So now when you look at all the settings down here, this might be a little bit overwhelming, but since we only need a very few of them, you will see that this is actually not that complicated. So let's take a look at the most important settings here for us. First of all, the base color. If I click on this white field, I can change the color and also the brightness. So pretty easy. Then the second most important value is the roughness over here, which defines how rough the surface should appear. So basically this will blur out the reflections in the object. If I set this to 0, as you can see, then we have a perfect smooth reflective surface. And if I set this to a higher value, then you can see this appears to be really rough. So depending on what kind of object you want to create, either a reflective plastic, for example, you use a very low roughness value, or for a concrete ground, you probably use a very high roughness value. Then the next important value is the metallic. So if this value is set to 0, we basically have a non-metallic material. So basically everything which is not metallic. But if we want to create a metallic object, we have to set this value to 1. then you can see the appearance of the object changed. And if I now play around with the roughness, you can see that this really looks like a metallic apple right now. So also pretty easy. Let's set this back to 0. And the last thing I want to show you here is the transmission value. If I set this to 1, we basically have a glass material. So we have this nice refraction in here. Right now, it's only refracting this image here, which is basically put into the background of our scene and lights up our scene. But this is hidden here in the 3D viewport, so we can't really see it. But we can see it here through the refraction, but we can't see the ground, for example, or the knife in the background. And this we have to enable manually for the viewport, the real-time display of our scene. For that, scroll down here in the material settings, go to settings and enable screen space refraction. And to make this work in general, we have to go to the render settings, enable screen space reflections. Then you can see we already have this nice real-time reflections on the object. And if I open this up, we also have to enable the refractions. And now, as you can see, also the ground and the knife will be incorporated into the refraction. So let's go back to the material. And that's basically everything. So the base color, metallic, roughness, and transmission. So now I want to show you how to add a simple texture to the object here. So first of all, let's set transmission down to 0. Also metallic should be 0. We just want to have a standard material. And instead of the base color, we want to use the texture. And for that, we click on this little dot behind the color. And here in the textures category, we choose image texture. Now you can see the color will be replaced with the texture. And now we can either open this from our hard drive, create a new plain image, or we can take a look into the library, because every image we load into Blender, no matter it is in the texture paint mode or for the textures or anywhere else, Blender will put the information into our image library and will remember everything we loaded into Blender. So we don't have to import this image once again, because the Apple Paint image is still in here. So simply click on that, and then this will be attached to the base color of this shader. So let's close this. And now you can see this apple has now this nice texture, and this will also display here perfectly in the 3D viewport. So this apple object now has a simple, very flat surface, which is reflective. Certainly we can play around with the roughness here to kind of match the look with a real apple. But what's really missing here are the imperfections. That means that the reflection is not everywhere the same, and maybe we have little bumps here and there on the surface. And this we also can create using our materials. So, but for that, I won't recommend to use this material tab here, because we basically can do everything here. We can add more informations if I click on those dots here. But basically all the information we add will just be listed underneath each other, and then you will just have a long list with a lot of values and you will get totally confused. So I don't recommend to do more than adding a simple texture and changing the base values here. For everything else, we need the shader editor. And for that, we simply go over here to the shading workspace. As you can see here in this shading workspace, we have a different arrangement of windows and editors. Up here we have our 3D window, also with the LookDev mode enabled by default. So don't be confused with this little balls here, which is basically just a perfect reflective ball and a white ball, which shows the interaction with the lighting setup, which can be helpful as reference compared to what we create here. But for now, you basically can ignore those. Then over here, we have the file browser open if we want to add textures, but we will do it a bit differently. So we can right click on the edge here and click on join area, and left click on this window to remove this. And down here, we have the image editor enabled, but also we don't need it here. So right click on the edge, join area, and remove it. But what we need here is the shader editor, which is open down here. So if I click on that, you can see the shader editor is enabled. So, and the shader editor is basically just a different way to show everything we set up here in the material tab. So everything I do over here, for example, let's quickly change the roughness, and you will see that the roughness over in the shader editor will change as well, because everything here is basically mirrored over here, just in a different way. Here we use these nodes, and the nodes are driven by input and output. So let's left click somewhere to deselect everything and then left click and hold to move a node around. This thing here is the texture I've plugged into the base color, and you can see that we have the texture here, Apple Paint, and the color output, so always the stuff on the right side of a node is the output, is plugged into the input on the left side here of this principled shader. So here we have a texture, here we have a shader, and everything which is calculated inside the shader will be outputted over here and will be transferred to the material output node and connected to the surface, which basically means that everything we do here will finally show up on the surface of this selected object. Just for your understanding, everything you see down here or over here is dependent on the selected object. So if I select the ground here, you can see we don't have any material yet. That means over here, nothing will show up. If I select the apple, you can see the connected apple material will show up here and here in the shader editor as well. So, and the shader editor compared to this menu over here is way more clear, since every aspect we add to the node tree here will be clearly visible all the time. So here, for example, if I open the texture settings, it will just be placed somewhere here in between all the other menus and sliders and settings, and it's not really clearly visible what belongs to what. But over here we can see clearly that this is our Apple Paint texture, and we know exactly which settings belong to this node here or to this texture. And we can also see very clearly the relationship of this texture to all the other nodes here with the connections. In order to connect or disconnect nodes, you simply left click and hold on an input node, move it out and release your mouse button. Then this will be disconnected. Now you can also see that we still have the texture node, but it's not connected with the base colors. And then we only see the base color we set up here on the final model, because this node sends the information to the surface of the object. In order to connect nodes, we left click and hold on an output dot here and simply move the noodle, this line is called noodle, to the input and release your mouse, and then this will be connected. You can also quickly disconnect two nodes by holding down Control, right click and hold and cut this. So this works as well. Then you can see that we have different colors for the input and output. This is also important. Basically, these colors define which nodes we can connect to what other nodes, but this we will learn while we are going. So right now we just have the texture, we have the principled shader and the output node so that we can see everything over here. But as mentioned, I want to make the Apple look a little bit more interesting. When you download texture packs online, for example on texturehaven.com, they will ship not only with the diffuse color, so the basic color, but also with different maps like a bump map, a normal map, a specular map, roughness map, and all these things. All these maps you basically can put into the shader editor and plug them into the right spot of the principled shader, and then everything looks perfect. However, in our case we have a custom made texture, so we texture painted the apple, we have a UV map, and we don't have all these maps. There are certain tools we can use or in Photoshop tweak everything so that we have kind of the other maps. But this is a time-consuming process, and this is nothing I want to discuss in this video. But I want to show you a quick and easy way how you can kind of mimic the effect of different maps on the model here with a quick and cheap setup. But in the end, it's just important how their final scene looks like. It doesn't have to be super realistic, but just has to look really good. So down here, we can add more nodes by clicking the Add button here, and then we have different categories. For example, here under shader, we can also find the principled shader. And as soon as I click on one of those nodes, this will be added. It now sticks to my mouse cursor, and with left click, I can place it. With X or delete, I can simply delete the selected node. I can also box select multiple and then left click and hold on them and move them around. With left click somewhere, we can deselect everything. By scrolling the mouse wheel, we can zoom in and out. And with middle mouse button click, we can pan the view here. So pretty straightforward. Instead of clicking the Add menu, similar as for the 3D view over here, we can also hit Shift A. This also worked in the 3D view. This also works down here. And in this case, it's very important to understand that the shortcuts we press only works in the editor where our mouse cursor is. So if I move my mouse cursor up here into the 3D view, press Shift A, you can see it opens the Add menu for the 3D view. And if down here I press Shift A, it opens the Add menu for the shader editor. And this applies also for all the other editors. If I use a certain shortcut, for example over here, I press Shift D because I want to duplicate the apple, but you can see nothing happens. But if I press here Shift D, the apple will be duplicated. So always take care where your mouse cursor is. So down here, let's hit Shift A, and the first thing I need is under Converter, the color ramp. So I will just add a bunch of nodes while we discuss all this stuff here. And these nodes seems to be kind of random and really strange to you. And this is totally fine, but in the end, you will see that we will use certain nodes over and over again. And for creating very simple shaders and materials, you don't need much nodes. So the few nodes we will use in this scene is in most cases, when you create simple materials, everything you need. So I will explain all the nodes we add here and what they are doing. So first of all, this is a color ramp node. You can see we have this black and white gradient over here. And what we can use this for is we can basically plug the color of the Apple Paint texture. So left click and hold, put this into the FAC value down here. You can see this will be replaced. And now if I temporarily connect the color output with a base color, we can see what happens inside of this node. This node uses a color output. This yellow dot always means color. This we connect with a gray input. Gray always means numeric or grayscale. This will basically convert the color into grayscale using this color ramp here. And with these two colors, the black and the white, we define what color the bright values of the texture should have and the dark. So basically all the dark values are now black and all the bright values are white or brighter. So we could also change the colors here. We can make it brighter and make this blue, and this one, for example, red. Now the bright values use the reddish color here and the dark values the blue color. So let's undo this because I want to have black and white. So when I now left click on those handles, hold and move them around, you can see that I can change the values. Basically, if I add more black here, you can see that we also add more dark values to the texture. Or the other way around, if I put the right value over here, everything gets brighter. And what do we need this color ramp for? Certainly not for the color. We don't want to have a black and white apple here. We want to have this for the roughness. So let's reconnect the color of the texture with the base color of the principal node. And now we want to output the color ramp and input this into the roughness. But before I do that, let's quickly take a look at the roughness value. If I set the value down to 0, you can see we have a perfect reflective surface. If I put this to 1, we have like a very rough surface. And the numbers 0 and 1 in values means basically 0 black and 1 white. And everything in between are grayscale values. So, and if we take a look at this color ramp again, we now have dark spots on this apple and bright spots. And that means on the dark spots, we basically have a roughness value of 0 or in general a very low value. And on all the bright spots, we have a relatively strong value. So the roughness is stronger. So, and if I now connect this with the roughness, you can see that this slider here will be replaced by our roughness map. So now let's reconnect the color. And now let's play around here a bit. And you can see how this is changing the surface. So you can see in some areas we have a little bit more glossiness and in other areas not. And in the end, I want to have a very wet looking apple because we will add some physical raindrops to the apple later on. So we kind of need some glossiness here and there. So I play around with these values until this looks good to me. What we also can do, we can select the dark values, click on the color down here and just make them brighter. That means we make the dark values brighter. That means we add more roughness to the very glossy areas. So that means no area here is like 100% glossy. We will tweak these values later on when we get to the lighting and rendering process, so that from the camera perspective everything looks perfect. What we also can do all the time is to check other lighting conditions and to see how the apple looks in other lighting conditions. When we take a look at a real apple, you can see that we have all these tiny little bumps and scratches, which makes the surface uneven. But here in Blender, as you can see, we still have a perfectly flat surface, and that's why we want to add a bump map. But as mentioned before, since this is a custom-made texture and we don't have used any other tool, we don't have a bump map. A bump map is basically just a black and white image. White means that we basically pull out the surface, and black means that we push them inwards. And here again, similar as for the roughness, we will use a sheep trick. So first of all, I hit Shift A, go to Vector and add a bump node. And the bump node has a height value. And here we simply use the color of our apple texture, plug this into the height, and then we simply need to connect the normal output of the bump node with the normal input of the principled shader. Now you can see what happens. Basically, we are using the values of this texture, put them into a bump node, and this will kind of calculate the height of each pixel of the texture. So all the bright values are pushed out and all the black values are pushed in. Certainly, since we have a little bit of shadows on the texture and some areas of the textures are just a bit brighter than others, just from the color, this means that this is not realistic at all. However, if I reduce the strength here quite a bit, then we have these very tiny little bumps on the surface. And since they are so small, it doesn't have to be super realistic, but it totally adds to the realism of the apple. So now the surface is not perfect anymore. So you can play around with the settings. I will probably play around with these a little bit more later on. But for now, I think 0.025 is a quite good match, I think. And with these few nodes here, we created a semi-realistic surface for the apple. But I think when we're just starting out here, this looks already pretty awesome. All right, now I quickly want to add a material to the knife. And since we set up everything here already, and the knife should have a pretty similar setup, we don't need to set up everything again. So what I do, I select the handle of the knife, and whenever we create a material in Blender, this will be added to a material library inside of this blend file. So that means if this is selected, I can go to the material tab, and instead of creating a new material, I take a look into the library by clicking this button. And here you can see we have the apple material. Let's click on that, and then this will be connected to this handle as well. Certainly the texture is not fitting since we have a different UV map, but we have all the settings down here already. However, the problem is, if I now change anything down here, this will also be changed on the apple, because this is not a new material we have created. This is just the same material we used on the apple, also connected to a second object. So you basically can connect one material to as many objects as you like, and as soon as you change anything on the material, it will be changed on all the objects. However, we want to use this as foundation and then tweak this a bit, and this we can do over here. You can see we have a 2, which means 2 objects are using the material. Now let's simply copy this material by clicking this button, and then you can see the name has changed, and in the library we now have 2 materials. Let's call this knife handle, and let's replace the texture. What I could do, I could click on this button and then open a new image, but I also want to show you a different way to add an image here to the shader editor. So let's delete this one here. And what we can do basically here, we can take a look in our texture folder and simply drag and drop this image into the shader editor. Then, as you can see, a new texture node will be created. Or you simply hit Shift A, go to Texture and click on Image Texture. Then you have to click Open and open the file you want to load into this image texture node. But this we can avoid by simply dragging and dropping this here. Then this is already connected with the texture on our hard drive. So let's reconnect this to the base color and to the color ramp and also to the bump node. So first of all, let's increase the bump a little bit. And maybe let's use a different lighting setup here with a stronger light from the side, then we can see it better. so I won't make this too strong. And let's also play around with these settings here. So I just played around a little bit until I think this looks good. Also, again, we will check this in the final scene, and if needed, then we can tweak this again. And this is basically all we need to do. Just change the color ramp here a bit for the roughness and the bump for the uneven surface. So now let's select the blade over here. And here we want to add the same texture as the handle, but we want to tweak the settings again. So what we do, again, we select the object, go to the library and add the knife handle material. You can see the texture already fits perfectly because the UV map just fits perfectly to this knife paint image. But I want to make this a metallic material. And again here, since the handle shouldn't be a metallic material, we have to duplicate this. Call this knife blade. You can see this is now also available in the library here. And all I need to do here is set the principled shader to metallic. So set this to 1. And certainly this should be more flat, so we reduce the strength quite a lot of the bump map. And we can also play around with the color ramp. So this should be quite rough, but I also want to have some reflections in here. I think something like this looks kind of interesting. Again, you can change the lighting setup to see how this looks in different lighting conditions. And I think this looks quite good. So, and again, don't forget to save with Ctrl S. Yeah guys, as you can see, with a simple texture and some nodes we can already create some beautiful looking materials. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to give it a like and subscribe to this channel and ring the bell if you want to get notified for future videos. If you enjoy our content and want to extend your knowledge and support this channel here, you can check out our Blender 2.8 Launchpad course. There we will use our imagination to create this beautiful stylized animated 3D scene from scratch. If you want to learn more, check the link in the video description. Thanks a lot for watching guys. Now check the next video where we will create the materials for the bowl and the wooden planks, and there we will use some special techniques which allows us to create these materials without using a UV map. So make sure to check this out. I will see you there. Goodbye.